gentlemen, welcome. Welcome at the Vytautas Magnus University today for the International Conference, Open Professional Collaboration for Open Classroom. The conference will be for 2 days. My name is Sandra Kuchina. I'm the Eden Vice President and work at the University of Zagreb. And I greet all of you here at the premises of the university, but also all of you online, because we are in the middle of the European Distance Learning Week, which is organized by Eden. So please join us all for today's plenary session. This conference is organized by European Distance E-Learning Network Eden, UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education, the Ministry of Education and Science in Lithuania, and Vytautas Magnus University. Aim of this conference is to discuss the challenges of open professional collaboration at all levels of education, but also at the national, regional, European and global initiatives level. So before we start with our program today, I'm happy we have here people who would like to welcome you. So for the first, I'll ask our host, Ineta Dabashinskiene, Vice Rector for International Affairs at Vytautas Magnus University, to welcome you, please.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, conference participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is truly a great pleasure, honor, and privilege to welcome you at this international conference organized and hosted by Vytautas Magnus University and co-organized with the European Distance and E-Learning Network, so-called EDEN, and also UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies and Education, and also the Ministry of Education and Science in Lithuania. We know very well that the higher education landscape is undergoing significant change because of technological innovations. On the one hand, the developments and integration of these innovations into learning and teaching activities seem necessary to modernize the process. On the other hand, this process is rather slow because of its complexity. However, luckily, online technologies provide opportunities to learn anywhere and anytime. This flexibility is essential for non-traditional learners, for those who come from underrepresented and socially disadvantaged groups. We hope that it will enable a shift change in the engagement of higher education institutions in lifelong learning and continuing professional development. Needless to say, new technologies can facilitate greater collaboration, both with global partners and also at local level. Developing educational partnerships is an important element of Europe's strategy for cooperation with other parts of the world, while also providing a mechanism for improving the status of education in emerging economies. Vytautas Magnus University has started to integrate technology into an organization already in 2008. The first results proved the need to make changes in all the processes to ensure responsible and responsive integration of digital technologies, including but not limiting to the strategy and management, curriculum design, continuous professional development, and quality assurance. The change have also provided a platform for reaching international markets and contributed to the existing developments in cross-border education. With this conference, we seek to develop open collaboration among regional, national and European initiatives and programs. We would like to hear out and discuss how to overcome challenges of open education and how to implement innovation and technology enhanced learning in higher, adult, school and vocational education and training. Additionally, we are eager to find flexible and manageable ways to make the best of learning innovations. And of course, finally, I would like to thank all the initiators and co-organizers of this international gathering for their great contributions, for their time and efforts. And especially I would like to thank our local team of IRUNA, for their sincerely dedication to this event, but also dedication to the idea of distance and e-learning opportunities. And I would also like to say that we are very proud that Professor Irina Volungavičienė is the president of EDEN, of this very active globally network. So we think that this is a recognition, international recognition of her sincere dedication to the idea, her enthusiasm and professionalism. So I think that now we can say, let's start the conference. Let's share good practices and ideas, and let's try to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Rector, for very kind words. And now, as mentioned before, I'm asking Irina Volungavičienė, EDEN President and Director of Innovative Studies Institute at Vytautas Magnus University, to welcome our guests.
Dear colleagues gathered here in Kaunas and also watching us online in the framework of European Distance Learning Week, as Sandra correctly mentioned. EDEN is one of the most important organizations for us who are here today, among with global leaders that we have representatives here in this panel. It works on a European level in order to foster collaboration. And through the initiative of openness, of open education that comes globally, but which is very much supported and enhanced by the policy of education in Europe, we are happy that we have a strand for open professional collaboration. Why? We actually have a lot of challenges that we face today. The biggest challenge is the divide. Divide in the value systems, in understanding, in generating and using the same message, the same key message that we must invest in our societies, that we must invest in people, and to develop them the way we want to see them tomorrow. And in order to have this vision, we need to collaborate, we need to communicate what we want, and to agree upon the tools that should be used to reach our aims and visions. So this is very important for us. And as the conference, the major event, the massive event will be tomorrow, today we dedicated already a couple of series of pre-conference workshops for all levels of education, schools, vocational education and training and companies, adult and higher education, to start collaborating in smaller groups, because tomorrow they will have interactive, hard, difficult sessions, active sessions that will have to come up with the results, what they want to see professional collaboration for tomorrow in Europe, globally. And technologies, open and distance learning, allows vast possibilities that we must use in order to work more efficiently and to reach better results. So that is why we think in EDEN that open classroom that already celebrates the second decade of its tradition actually becomes very important today, not only for school section, but also for VET adult and higher education. So this is the strength of Eden, and that's why we use this opportunity to bring national and international professional communities to start working together to bridge the gap. So let's decrease the divide, let's open more, and let's collaborate more. So we invite all of us to embrace this in Eden. So have fruitful discussions today, but also we wait for you to come back tomorrow for the mass conference day. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. And now I'm calling the Asta Junevičienė, Lithuanian National Commission for UNESCO, to welcome today's conference.
Dear organizers of the conference, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to address you on the occasion of this international conference. The recent year has been abundant in meetings, consultations, and forums of various formats dedicated to the topic of open education. It reflects the global developments in the area and the importance of international agreements on regulation and strategies to guide the process. UNESCO is one of the main actors on the scene, and I believe that many of the speakers will refer to the proceedings and has already referred to the proceedings of the Second World Conference on Open Educational Resources held in Ljubljana in September this year. The question on open educational resources was among most important during debates in the Communication and Information Commission at the 39th session of the UNESCO's General Conference, currently continuing in Paris. It was decided that UNESCO, together with its member states, will have to prepare a recommendation for future international collaboration in the field of open educational resources until the next 40th session of the General Conference, which will take place in 2019. This decision was adopted with an overall support of all UNESCO member states. The debate has proved that there is enormous interest in shifting open educational resources and open education in general to a higher level, and it seems that the open educational resources momentum is very strong. It also shows a breakthrough of the mindset of policymakers, which I hope will result in more favorable international and national commitments to actions, strategies, and legislation in this area. It was also stated in the Congress in Ljubljana, in order for open educational resources to reach its full transformative potential, it needs to be more integrated part of educational policies and practices from early childhood education to post-secondary, also of technical vocal educational training, higher education, lifelong learning, and teacher training. We also strongly support the Ljubljana's call for action to mainstream open educational resources in the capacity of users to access, reuse, and share issues related to language and culture, safety and security of content, ensuring inclusive and equitable access, changing business models to support digital transformation according to public funding and legal frameworks, and the development of supportive policy environments. I'm sure that this forum will also serve to reflect on the outcomes of the conference and discuss the possibilities to integrate the visions on the national and local level. For here we have the educational stakeholders from all sectors concerned. It is also a special task for national commissions for UNESCO of UNESCO member states to advocate for the access, equality, and flexibility of education and the variety of forms provided by the open education as a driver for realization of inclusive knowledge societies. One of the open education activity, integrating open batch standard for associated schools in Lithuania, being implemented in cooperation with our long-term partner, Association of Non-Formal Education, was already presented in this morning's session of the conference. The entire national network of UNESCO associated schools has integrated the technological standard of open badges which help systematically plan students' learning, monitor progress, evaluate, and award learning and achievements. So along with the advocacy work, the pilot project is our practical input in open education as well. The Lithuanian National Commission for UNESCO believes in the future of open education resources. We are also planning to publish the digital resource material on World Heritage Education on the basis of UNESCO's kit World Heritage in Young Hands. It is indeed an urgent topic, and education on it should be inclusive, open, and participatory. So let me finish by wishing you an interesting, inspiring, and fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And at the end, I would like to call Estela Daukšienė on behalf of the Lithuanian Association of Distance and E-Learning to welcome.
Hello everyone, dear colleagues, dear presenters. I'm really glad to welcome you here in Kaunas in Lithuania on behalf of Lithuanian Distance and E-Learning Association, which unites 50 educational institutions at the moment in Lithuania. And on behalf of our association, I would like to say that we really focus on sharing our good practices and collaborating, and we're really glad that this conference provides us the possibility to share our good practices and also to hear other viewpoints and challenges and to participate in discussions here on behalf of education and educational changes. So we're really glad that this type of conference is in Kaunas, in the heart of Lithuania. And we really hope to share our practices and to find solutions, at least for our institutions. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Listening to welcoming words from our hosts and organizers, I can only say that we are looking for very positive and clear goal conference. So I hope that every one of you will be happy at the end of the conference or each part you take into. So let's get back to work. We have today 3 presentations, and then we have a panel. Title of today's panel is Reconsidering Access, Quality and Flexibility of Education. And within this panel, the first of the lecture, the first speaker, is Gard Titelstad from International Council for Distance Education, ICDE. Gard was, before Nordic, was working as a head of the Department for Knowledge and Welfare at the Nordic Council of Ministers in Copenhagen, Denmark, where he managed the Secretariat for various configuration of ministers, the Ministers of Education and Research, the Minister for Health and Social Affairs, and before that also the Minister for Labor Affairs and Ministers for IT. Gard's focus was on Nordic cooperation in education, research and innovation, and the so-called knowledge triangle, and in particular the role university. In 2011, Gard joined the ICD, and now he's their Secretary General. The title of his lecture is Transformation of Education in the Era of Openness and Flexibility. So Gard, please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, I've got this title to talk about, which is about some of the most exciting development that is happening in our world today. I will try to respond on 3 issues during this speech. And first of all, I need to get up my slides, so I hope they will come. Okay. Now, Before I do my reflections, I want to give a tribute to my colleagues in Canada that just organized the ICT World Conference with 1,400 delegates from almost 100 countries, discussing many of the issues you will touch upon here. And I do this a tribute now because we need to collaborate and share. And one of the things that my colleagues in Canada delivered was a number of good papers where you can see the link, and all links that are provided in this presentation. You can use them for your own self-thought experience. And these reports are really to the point, and they deliver into the same that I will discuss today. Now, that was the congratulations to Contact North. So it's something that is not working on this one, so I have to use the mouse. Now, quickly on ICT, it's a global organization that has the vision to facilitate quality learning in the digital age. The main office is in Oslo as the only global NGO hosted by Norway. And we have been partners with UNESCO for more than 50 years. And we also issue a scientific journal and believe in the values of open, transparent, accountable, and focus on good governance. Why transform education? Isn't it okay as it is? Well, I think that it is at least 3 reasons why we need to transform education. It is the learners' and societal needs, it is the big shift, and the global risks and the sustainable development goals. Now, first, the learners' needs, societal needs. Even there have been progress, we have still more than 260 million youth, adolescents, and children that are out of school. And if you take into account all those that are also out of studies, this number is even much higher. The situation is also that within higher education area, while 100 were enrolled in 2000, it doubled to 2015, and the estimates for formal higher education needs 2030 is almost 3-fold. In addition to that, we have seen an explosion in adult, already educated needs that we even can't estimate, and they are illustrated by the popularity of MOOCs. We can only meet this by using the new opportunities of technology and flexible learning. And there is hope out there. Think about this. For the first time in human history, it is possible to achieve inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning for all. And this is also the goal that your prime and the other primes and heads of states in the world has agreed on. Enabled by open, enabled by the digitalization. And what is more important than hope as a motivator and driver for the development? Now, there are hurdles out there, and one of the most important is funding. And here, exemplified by the Minister of Education from Bangladesh, that financing is one of the greatest challenges faced by the low-income and middle-income countries. To do this, and think about the cuts in Europe, 50% on many universities, for example in Spain, also in your country you have cuts. So that is why, for me, it is disturbing that the most important supplier to education in our countries, namely Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, rob the nations, according to the conservative newspaper in Norway published yesterday, which is published by the Paradise Papers, which show that they put their money into tax havens instead of being taxated in the countries where they do the profit. This is a serious global and European problem. And I can't keep quiet while I'm a spokesman for fair education in the world, because this is not fair. Now, to the big shift, which is also a reason for why education needs to transform. You are all aware of these huge leaps in innovation, and now we are in a so-called sixth wave, which is also called the fourth industrial revolution. And as the MOOCs, massive online and open courses, flooded higher education 5 years ago, now it's all about artificial intelligence. I came around the world with this slide that artificial intelligence will come to an office close to you. 3 years ago, nobody wanted to listen to me. I thought this was a bit unpleasant. Okay? Now, it is all over. In conferences, in journals, in papers, and so on and so forth. The good thing is that right now artificial intelligence is not nearly as smart as people would like it to be. And PricewaterhouseCoopers, they regard the development as this. At the moment is quite dull, but still effective. Artificial intelligence that is on the marketplace will emerge quickly into more fundamental changes in functioning robots and to a future where adaptive, continuous intelligence systems take over decision-making, which raise the future of humans at work to be discussed. This is an extremely important philosophical and ethical question. So the advice I give to our members, institutions and associations around the world is simply that, first of all, build awareness and insight, and if you have it on your university, use it. It is to establish relevant courses and educational offerings to build competencies in artificial intelligence, and it is take part as universities and academic institutions in the debate on future directions and ethics. The learners is a part of this shift. Why? Well, we see in front of us that nowadays we have learners all over. And a new paradigm of learning has started growing. It is not sequential anymore as it was for me. Starting playing when a child, learning at school, and then job, then retirement. Now, it's all going parallel, more and more. So we do it all at once. Not in one go, but in parallel. And we see the need for new skills growing rapidly. And even on the right side, you see the skills identified for 2015, and already for 2020, you have a number of new skills that is highly requested, according to the World Economic Forum, in particular critical thinking, complex problem solving, creativity, so on and so forth. So why is lifelong learning climbing higher on the political agenda? Well, first of all, digitalization, of course. That changes all our working places, education, and much, much more. Then demographic development. We like to be active, more, longer. And all the changes that take place, not because of digitalization, but because of globalization. We are still in the starting phase of globalization. And if you look at newspapers like Financial Times, you can see very important information like this one, that given that 99% of the jobs created from 2008 to 2016 in the US required more than high school certificate, this will be crucial. This is the new jobs. You will not enter the new jobs unless you have at least up to 2 years higher education certificate. Think about that. And if you look at the past, the need for cognitive intelligence, or here expressed as cognitive intensity, you'll see that when we had a previous wave of information, society, technologies, the breakthrough of the internet back in 2000, there was an enormous rapid growth from companies and governments in digital intelligence at that time. That is the peak here in cognitive intensity. This is the old jobs, not the new jobs, the old jobs. But you will see that quite quickly after that, this request dropped down again. So now it's the new jobs. This is the American market. Now, here is a global oversight that shows that the preparedness for this rapid changes in the labor market and the preparedness for education to follow up that is unevenly distributed around the world. This graphic shows on the X that it is slower labor market disruption, and the bottom, it is a situation that require lower added skills, and then opposite on the right, where you have quicker changes and low added skills, and on the top right, quick changes, high requirement for skills. And there is the top right, the development for the good, according to World Economic Forum will come. And not many countries are positioned there at the moment. But again, why lifelong learning? Well, I've now showed you some example from the marketplace, the need for skills, and so on and so forth. But as this working paper underlined, that an alternative justification, which seen from my point of view is extremely important, that is social justice. It is about the holistic human being taking part as a democratic right in the society. Now, this will be discussed and much more at the Lillehammer Lifelong Learning Summit, which is a global summit that is prepared for 2019 by ICDE in February in Snow. Then, I've looked at transformation. Why? Transform? How? Well, we can transform, as several have said here, through online, open, flexible, and technology-enhanced methodologies. And look at one of the journals, leading journals for higher education in the US. It summarized nicely that online learning has now reached a tipping point in higher education. So going from the margin, it is now mainstream. As a percentage, 40% of each of the students in the US have at least one online course. While different types of online learning, like the MOOCs, may not live up to their initial hype, online education, which is performed by educators, students, collaborative with student support, that will deliver, and it will not go away. And I don't use more than this one evidence. You could have had 10. So the message is that we need now all higher education, all stakeholders to provide innovation in the learning process. So the best from these methodologies can be harvested so we can transform education. And just to give you an example of that very quickly, coming from the local association in Norway. First of all, you need a didactical model, here illustrated with these 7 different goals for your educational process. For example, you need to have a target group, you need to have content, you need to have decided on learning outcome, etc. And here I will set up the process for you that you are very well familiar with, I guess. You have learning objectives and you have learning outcome. Then you invite your students in a webinar. You use crowdsourcing to gather resources for the learning, do co-writing. You have a theory video, self-paced, and you can do a test, and you have a learning blog, peer assessments, comments on the blog by the students, you have a group task, you have a case, you have an oral presentation, you have written feedback from the teacher, and in total, here you see the learning process and the feedback assessments. This is an example for what my Norwegian colleague regards as quality flexible learning. And if you put that into a more overall model and look into the innovation capacity, the innovation opportunities, you can put up some layers. For example, the ICT infrastructure, high-capacity networks. You can talk about what is the education provider's basic infrastructure, like the learning management systems. What are the institution-wide applications you use, like e-assessment? How do you establish the student support, the teacher support? The applications for interaction, creative collaboration, and motivation, and content and devices. Where is open content? Where are the learners? They are the purpose. Now, this is one model. You can also use another model, like time to market. And in this case, it is taken from the Horizon Report 2017. You put the model into that, and when is it appropriate to look at different types of technologies to have them running in your open learning environment? So in this model, there is nothing about open, and that is the main weakness by the model, because it's not clearly explained. However, it is all about content. Now, all seems to talk about the importance and future of learning and how technology is transforming education. Would you agree in this front page of The Economist, just published? Would you agree in this? Come on. Agree or disagree? Well, I disagree. It's not technology, it's people. All about people. Now, quick survey. Here you have 5 questions. You all have to respond on them. OER uptake is increasingly rapidly towards tipping point. OER uptake is steadily increasing. OER uptake is stable. OER is a flop. I don't really know what OER is. Okay. How many agree with number 1? Raise your hand. No. Nobody. 2. How many agree with number 2? Some. Maybe 20%. How many agree with number 3? 1. Good. And 4? 2. 4. 4. Nobody. 5. I do not really know. Up with your hands. Up with your hands. Well, you seem to be better than when I talked to all the adult educational leaders in Denmark, because then it was only 20 persons among 200 that had heard about OER, and only 5 that knew what it was. So this open, which ICD commit to, which is about educational material, it is about licensed, which has a number of capacities, and that already explained by our representative from the UNESCO committee in Lithuania, has a huge potential. It is really in a need for promotion, connection, advocacy. And this is what ICD respond on, and I guess you have similar things going on here. And as said, now governments are moving into the next phase, so be prepared. The time will not allow me, since I thought I should talk in 30, I will talk in 20 minutes, as I just was informed about. Then I will not discuss this part, but hopefully we can come back to it. But I will quickly, since I have, according to my watch, 1 minute and 5 seconds left, the slide, so you see what it is about, because this is the most important part, but might be a bit difficult to understand if you don't know the other things. And that is, the risks in the world is why, part of why we have goals. Now everything has become more uncertain, and we still have our goals decided by our primes. It penetrates into the population, but very slowly. It is 17 goals, and there are a number of values added to those goals. For higher education, it's only one, 4.3, that is relevant, and here it is. And you see that OER and distance education is in the core. However, that is not why higher education is here. That is not why we need to transform education. We need to transform education to address all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So that is why. Surprise. Because if we don't, what about the goals? They will just go down the drain. And the main purpose of all we are doing is to use my colleague's slide here, Dajun Wang, that it is in the same board as me in UNESCO Institute for IT. Our main purpose of all we do is to make the students fly. So here is the conclusion. We transform for affordable access to job-relevant quality higher education and for SDG 4, and to transform education for all 17 SDGs. And thank you, and 37 seconds over.
Thank you. This was great. I hope we will all fly after the conference because we will have new knowledge and new initiative and motivation. So, but before you sit, I have just 1 minute. I have something to give you. Oh, I have to stand, and you have to come to me. Well, thank you for your participation at the conference. And here's a little certificate and token of appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, after this very inspiring speech, and I hope we will all know after the conference, if we don't know yet, what is OER, what is open education, that we all have same idea in mind. Let's move to the next speaker and keep all the questions you have in your head for the later, for all our speakers. Our next speaker is Mark Brown, Director of National Institute of Digital Learning from Dublin City University, and also Eden EC member. Mark is Ireland's first Professor of Digital Learning and Director of National Institute for Digital Learning, located at Dublin City University. Prior to taking up this position in 2014, Mark was Director of National Centre for Teaching and Learning at Massey University in New Zealand. So he coming from a long way, all over the globe he's traveling. Mark currently chairs the Innovation in Teaching and Learning Steering Committee for European Consortium of Innovative Universities and is Executive Committee member and a Fellow of Eden. And also, as Gard was mentioning, in Toronto was ICD World Conference now, just a few days, weeks ago. And also, we can announce that the next one will be at Dublin City University, where Mark is working. So there's a connection. I hope you also think that the next one will be even better than this one. Yeah, so Mark, you have a burden, on yourself. So Mark, title of Mark's presentation is Images of Education Futures, Looking at the Big Picture. So Mark, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Gard, I think I'm going to pick up on your challenge of why transform, and not part of my script, but I want to sort of just add 3 questions to the original question of why transform. Firstly, in answering that question, we need to also ask who is promoting the transformation. Secondly, for what purpose? And then thirdly, whose voice is not being heard in the debate or discussion around transformation. And I suppose, framed in Gard's bigger picture, I've deliberately aimed this brief talk, in the metaphor of the bigger picture. And so Gard, I think, has laid out the landscape for us to some degree. I want to contrast that landscape in another metaphor of the bigger picture, but I also want to be quite critical and quite challenging of the openness movement. Good, I now have my clicker here. The clicker's not working, I assume. Okay.
Technology.
Yeah. So, I'm looking at the bigger picture. And since you've been talking and listening for about 20 minutes or so, maybe 30 minutes, I want to start with a quiz. I've got 2 questions for you. Very simple questions. I just need to know this image I'm about to show you, where it comes from. What is it depicting? Have a look. Who knows? Does that look familiar to anyone? Ireland. And why might it be Ireland, or why might it look familiar? Okay, why do you recognise the castle? I might help you out a little bit more. It's a different image, but this might help you. Have you seen that anywhere before?
It's
Not quite. How many of you watch Game of Thrones? So, okay, you're all right. Not many, I think, could claim that they got the first question, but you've got a chance to recover. Remember, this is the education system. 50% you have to get in order to pass. So you've got one more chance. One more image. What is this image, and where is it from? So Diane, you've got at least 50%, maybe 75% with your previous answer. Yes, I'll help you out just a little bit more. That one should be much easier for you. So framing my talk around the bigger picture, I also wanted to use these images, and in the introduction, to some degree stealing my thunder, my accent is not Irish, my accent is from New Zealand, most definitely not Australian. And so I guess I'm bringing a perspective on the world that has a lot of the Southern Hemisphere view, but now more recently from Ireland and more generally Europe. You can take the person out of the country, nevertheless, but you can't take the country out of the person. So this image here comes from Mount Aspiring in the South Island of New Zealand. I'm sure someone in the group amongst us has been to New Zealand. I want to use this as a little bit of a metaphor. Imagine two people, one standing on one side of the mountaintops or the hill ranges looking down into the valley below, the valley of openness, of open education, and they see light. Whereas the person standing on the other hilltop looks down and they see dark. Of course, both are right. And I think that's a very good metaphor for the openness movement, which is much bigger than just open education or open learning. But it's a metaphor for our thinking and why we need to have almost bifocal vision. I want you to imagine, actually, we've got binoculars. We're looking down into the valley with binoculars. And of course, or a telescope might be a better metaphor, as we change the focus, we see different things. So that's how I'm going to anchor this talk, with the light and the dark. And I'm going to argue, or I'm arguing, that when we're talking about openness, my key message is the openness movement in education is actually quite problematic. You see, as the statement on the slide says, different interest groups with different viewpoints and agenda are borrowing and adapting the language of openness for very different purposes. And I hope to give you some examples of those purposes. What we really need, and I'm apologetic in some respects for being a bit theoretical here, but I think we need more powerful theories. I'm only going to give you a very simple theory. I like to keep things as simple as possible. But again, another anchor of this talk, coming from the work of Einstein, is it's the theories that we have to help us really understand what's happening, helps us to observe what really is going on. So there is a battle, a struggle in the context of openness. And I'm going to use just a theoretical lens, extending the metaphor of the telescope, but this is not like it really is. It's just a theoretical tool, a thought experiment. So please don't take it as if this is a match on reality. Nonetheless, extending this telescope, looking into the valley, I'm going to argue that these words of crisis, disruption, threat, unbundling, reimagination, all of these words are used in the context of openness, but they're used for different purposes. And I'll just anchor those purposes in two main traditions or two main perspectives to keep it simple. The first perspective is the perspective of the knowledge economy. I think it's fair to say that this is the dominant perspective currently. Perhaps not in this discussion over the next couple of days, but it is one that we should be debating and challenging. I want to give you some examples of this in a minute. But first, let us take this back, this movement of openness and the movement of the investment in new technology in education, right back to the period of, oops, right, try to get that slide to stay, too quick on the finger, right back to the period of Bill Clinton. You might think, why am I going back this far? Well, firstly, I want to illustrate using a president from the United States, obviously. I want to use this as well because only 2 weeks ago my university gave Bill Clinton an honorary doctorate. But here you can see Bill Clinton claiming that effectively all the investment in new technology and education, to paraphrase, is about the economy stupid. That's the outcome that we're seeking. That perspective contrasts with what I'll call the tradition of the learning society or the knowledge society. And I want to give you another famous quote, or a quote from someone we think is quite famous in Ireland, who happens to be our president, President Higgins. I'll read this one because it's a bit hard to see, probably in this light. This is a quote from the European Educational Association conference held in Ireland in 2016. Higher education has a crucial role to play in laying the foundations of a society that is more inclusive, participatory, and equal. The president said, and then he went on to say, the role of the university in enabling citizens to develop the tools to address the great challenges of our time, global poverty, climate change, and sustainability, was vital. A very different view, albeit that that was a long ago quote from Clinton. So it's not quite as simple as that in these two traditions. So I'm going to unpack this a little bit more in this thought experiment with 4 other perspectives. I'll call them discourses or languages of persuasion. The first one is what I'll call the reproducing discourse. And actually, this is the dominant language of persuasion in education. It's about education being a sifting agent for those people, for the talents they have, or not necessarily the talents they have, but from the cultural capital they bring to the educational experience. It's, on a more positive note, about the reproduction of cultural heritage, particularly, as Gard pointed out, in a very globalised world now. In a small country like New Zealand, it's very important for us that we protect and maintain our cultural heritage with our Indigenous peoples, as it is in many other countries. That's increasingly a challenge. On the other hand, this perspective, this language around reproduction, seeing now the micro-credentials emerge, which are challenging the status quo of elite qualifications, particularly from traditional universities, and a more personalised learning agenda. And initiatives like this from BC Campus in Canada, which is often cited as excellent examples of deschooling, of open textbooks. Well, who could argue against this as a good thing? Even here, where we're seeing a number of universities and other institutions introducing micro-credentials, how could we argue against this as challenging the status quo of what we've had in the past? And more than once today, we've already heard about digital badges. Again, challenging traditional views of qualifications. Well, I just want to share a cautionary note here. Yes, these may be deschooling initiatives, challenging the conventional. The danger, nonetheless, of those who assign themselves to this kind of perspective is you may well end up collaborating with the enemy. You see, deschooling is the ultimate, potentially, of creating a free market environment. In fact, publications like this that promote unbundling, the deschooling, are very similar to the books that I shared earlier. The drivers are almost identical, not truly about deschooling, but creating this global open marketplace. That's openness in a different form. And in fact, since I've used 2 other presidents, hopefully I'm not going to offend anyone here, here's a view that Donald Trump has of how openness can be seen in the United States. Open the schoolhouse doors, as I've amplified there in yellow. That's not openness as I think we're going to debate over the next couple of days, but it is an example of how this concept of openness is being borrowed by others and misused, potentially. I can't show you this video because it's not open. It's on YouTube, and I'd be told off if we showed it to you, but I invite you to have a look at it. It's called Learning is Earning. You'll find it very quickly on YouTube. And what this video talks about, I know Eve is going to tell us a little bit about the blockchain, I believe, over the next couple of days, but it's an example of how the blockchain can be used under the agenda of openness for people to invest in their individual education using EduBlocks, as they are called. And in fact, the model in this video is that if you're a really good student at school, you're able to put yourself up for someone to invest in your education. And this is being argued to pay for your education in the future, and they'll take a return on your salary. And this is argued as the ultimate of openness, of personalised learning. Just a couple of minutes left. I haven't got much longer to go. I'm sure many of you will know of George Siemens' work, who also sort of thinks at the big picture level. And this is a quote from George about this kind of unbundling. These forces are very powerful, and typically we're not around the table shaping the discussion. The last perspective, in the last minute or so, I want to share with you, I'll call a reconceptualizing one, which locates the openness movement as education as a public good in the agenda of lifelong learning, promoting more equitable societies. And in this sense, to contrast what I talked about as education in change, this is education for change. Why? And why transform? To answer Gard's question again, this study published back in January of this year by Oxfam showed that 8 men in the world now have as much wealth as half of the developing world. That's the real world we live in. That's what we need to transform. Here's a framework from UNESCO from many years ago, which I've adapted, which I see as a very powerful framework for the use of open education. I won't go into much detail at all, other than to link it into what was known at the time as the UNESCO Pillars of Learning. But education ultimately is about preparing critical thinkers, critical consumers, and critical citizens. So in conclusion, as I get the evil eye, not really, let me just give you a couple of points. The first is what actually I've tried to show is that openness maybe isn't as problematic as perhaps I've laid it out, but it's certainly messy. And we need to think of it as being something very messy. That's why it's hard to understand. Yes, frameworks such as this from Eve's office and the European Commission help to put some structure for us in Europe around the dimensions of open education. But I think it misses one important point. And maybe this is the most important point, since I'm right at the end. That is that openness should be in the service of big ideas, not the big idea itself. So I'd rather shift our language and debate away from talking about openness per se, and let's talk about the big ideas. One of them we've already heard, linked to the sustainability development goals. But actually that's at the macro level. Over the next day and a half, I hope we're going to talk about the big ideas at the meso and micro level, and even the nano level, which is you as an individual. On that note, I think I really do have to stop, other than to give you a little publicity, because we will continue these discussions in 2 years' time in a much more mature way, I hope, in Dublin at the World Online Learning Conference. Thank you.
To give you a certificate.
Thank you.
Yes. And some token appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for very interesting education. I was taking out the words from first to education. So far I have flying, looking over the valley with binoculars. So I'm going to see what's going to be, how the sentence is going to end. Actually, I think it's very important that we identify all the stakeholders in the educational process and clearly define their goals and their tasks in order to have what we are talking today about, transforming education. Why should we transform? What is it about, and how we are involved, and what is our goal. So with that in mind, I'm asking our next lecturer to join us. This is Svetlana Knyazeva, Chief of Section of Digital Pedagogy and Learning Materials at UNESCO Institute for Information Technology in Education. Svetlana holds a PhD in Information and Library Science and is Chief of Section of Digital Pedagogy and Learning Materials at UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies in Education, Moscow. Since 2009, she has been coordinating a project on OER in non-English speaking countries. She has promoted OER through analytical and diagnostic studies, strategic advice and facilitation of professional development related to the use of ICT and OER in teaching and learning. Her research interest covers innovative teaching methods and foresight in ICT in education. So, Svetlana, floor is yours. But just before you start, if the panelists would like to go to the first row to better see the presentation, there's no problem. So, yes. I thought maybe you will come to that on your own, but if you need some push, okay. Okay, so Svetlana, thank you. Yeah,
yes.
20 minutes, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. The topic of my speech is from open educational resources to open educational practices, but I would like to consider this subject from the prism of the future of credentialing of learning outcomes obtained with the use of OER and MOOCs. First, okay. Thank you. So first I would like to refresh the definition of open educational resources since some in this room raised their hands as an answer to the fifth GARDS question. So open educational resources are any educational resources that are openly available for use by teachers and students, by educators and students without paying royalties or fees. And they are considered open if they are released under open license or they exist in the open domain. First, I would like to say a few words about the UNESCO IIT project on OER in non-English speaking countries. We started in 2010, and until now we surveyed the state of the art of open educational resources in 22 non-English speaking countries. They are on the screen. We published several policy briefs and summary reports on these studies, and there are also brochures for some selected countries. The first one was produced for Lithuania, so this was the pioneer of our project, and the last report printed this year is for Germany. Two reports for Brazil and France were printed in two languages, for Brazil in English and Portuguese, for France in French and English. We also summarized the results of our research in publications jointly printed by UNESCO and the Commonwealth of Learning. So, just a brief summary of the main findings of this project. Main motivations of producers and users of open educational resources are, as we all know, interest in innovative technologies, teaching methods and resources, willingness to expand access of students and colleagues to materials, desire to enhance the visibility of higher education institutions, and an opportunity to gain additional recognition for appraisal, benefits, potential financial savings, and positive impact on quality of education, potential positive impact. We are also aware of the barriers for the development and use of open educational resources, and these are mainly, well, those ones that national and institutional strategies for ICT in education are mainly focused on infrastructure and seldom encourage the development of educational content. educators often lack awareness of OER and the opportunities they offer. Most people, not only educators, are not familiar with intellectual property rights regulations, and national IPR regulations are often incompatible with open licenses. Also, pedagogical approaches suggesting the use of OER are yet to be adopted by educators and universities. There are also the issues of quality assessment and assurance, and the lack of reward and encouragement system for teachers introducing OER in the educational practice. So some other barriers to be mentioned are the language barrier, and this I think is quite understandable for many non-English speaking countries. So lack of proficiency of English restricts the opportunities for localizing, adapting, reusing, etc. English language, abundant English language open educational resources. There are also technological barriers in the 22 countries. In most of them, this was infrastructure and lack of teacher ICT skills. There are economic issues, but surprisingly, well, most of the countries surveyed are developed or under transitions. Only France and Kenya are, well, developed countries. But surprisingly, Germany happened to be a latecomer to the OER movement. So sometimes, well, these economic rules don't work. Also, as I said, well, there are legal barriers related to intellectual property rights. And the last, but not least, but very important barrier is lack of knowledge-sharing culture among academicians. And, well, they prefer to produce, do research and produce their own content, not only to deliver, but to produce their own content. And if we speak about secondary schools, teachers are more interested in using pre-developed educational resources than developing their own or adapting resources themselves. Pedagogical barriers and regulatory barriers are that, well, in many countries that we were surveyed, formal education is overregulated, and institutions and teachers are very cautious about changing their policies and practices and using open educational resources, adopting and adapting resources from outside. There is also tension between the academic values of sharing knowledge and the commercial values of selling educational content and services, and or competing for fee-paying students or tuition-paying students nationally and internationally. Pedagogy still favors face-to-face presentation by a lecturer rather than flexible, resource-based, student-oriented learning. Based on the analysis of these barriers, our institute developed the recommendations for the governments and for institutions in developing and developed countries. And, well, as it was mentioned already, awareness raising and promotion of OER and open licenses is still a very important issue. Also, the education strategy should be revised and adequate provisions should be made for open educational resources and open educational practices. Public funding should be provided not only for ICT infrastructure and production of educational content, but also for the maintenance of OER repositories and acquisition of adequate ICT skills by teachers. Revision of pedagogical approaches, curriculum and quality standards is needed. Also, some changes are needed in the assessment and credentialing procedures and, as I said, fostering the concept of openness, the philosophy of sharing, reusing, adapting, readapting, translating, and localizing educational resources is a very important issue among educators, learners, and the general populations. This should be done by governments and institutions. I'll skip this slide. So governments are encouraged to, these are some practical measures that can be taken. Support national OER initiatives like it was in the Netherlands, Wikivideos, or UK OER program that is over now, but it was very helpful for the promotion of OER. Establishing national open universities, as it happened in many countries. Establishing national OER consortia, like, for example, the China Open Resources for Education, Japan and Turkish OCW Consortium, or encouraging institutions to join the Global Education Consortium. Also, some steps should be taken to revise policy and standards regulating higher education, providing financial mechanisms for the production and use of OER, and some other measures listed on this slide. I'm afraid I should rush because I still have many slides. So, now I would like to tell you about the UNESCO IAT Foresight project on ICT in higher education. The project included several major activities: desk study, analysis of trends, series of high-level expert workshops, and finally online survey. The online survey was focused on the following topics: future learning contexts for open content, future curricula, the future of validation of learning outcomes, the future role of teachers and faculty, and the changing role of higher education institution. But before I proceed to the findings of this survey and research, I also would like to ask you a question. Mark mentioned several times in his presentation the word unbundling. So who is familiar with this term as applied to educational content? Please raise your hands. So I can see that most part, yes. That's why I will have to explain this. Probably this will take some extra time, but so what does it mean, unbundling of content? So this started from the music industry. In 2003, iTunes unbundled a CD for the first time. The consumers could purchase the songs they wanted and not the whole disc. And unbundling the educational content, this means that you don't subscribe for the whole course from the beginning to the end, but you take the modules you need to upgrade your skills. And for example, Anand Agarwal, CEO of edX, believes that unbundling content is the future of education. Another concept that was mentioned, this is digital badges and micro-credentials or micro-credentialing. So this is also related to the unbundling when the content is fragmented into smaller parts. This means that the degrees are also separated in smaller digital certificates. There are even new nano degrees. The Android nano degree that was launched by Udacity in partnership with Google in 2015. And as we discussed this morning at the Vice Rector office, one more thing related to credentialing and a sustainable business model for using this. So Curtin University is a traditional university that provides classroom, face-to-face learning, online learning, and a student can select whichever model is preferable. And for example, if someone subscribes for 4 to 5 weeks MOOC, the student can get this content for free. If a student subscribes for MOOCs plus completion badge, this costs $100. If MOOC plus badge plus automated or electronic assessment badge, plus 100. If this is, the model is MOOC, badge, and human assessment, this costs in total 1,200, and the student gets 2.5 credits. And another model, if 12 weeks plus 3-4 assignments, the cost is 2,400 and 25 degrees. Now we can move on to the online survey. So it was launched online in 2015. 147 respondents from 54 countries replied to the survey. And I mentioned already the main topics of the survey, and now I would like to summarize briefly the findings. So most experts, these were policymakers and educators from higher education institutions. They recognize that the need for curriculum reform is due to such changes as the availability and development of OER and MOOC. The readiness to acceptance, use and recognition of learning outcomes for OER in MOOCs varies in different countries. The impact of these developments on the change of the roles of teachers and so these developments have an impact on the change of the roles of teachers and institutions, and there is an urgent need to retrain teachers. And these developments will have consequences on the way in which informal and formal learning results are translated into credits and can be transferred and used. So there is a consensus that the future mission of higher education and universities should be revised. And the universities should become knowledge centers for the whole society. The character of higher education will be, these are expectations of the respondents of the survey, will become less elitist and more open. As to the basic function, the experts suggested that the functions will change from content knowledge development and delivery to content facilitations and skill development. Most of the experts believe that the open content will become an integral part of the teaching and learning processes within the next 15 years. The transfer and recognition and micro-credentialing. I'm concluding. The certification system should be revised and assessment procedures should be harmonized to support a wider use of open content. The expert repeatedly emphasized the need to nourish personalized learning and learner-centered approaches with due account to the change in the needs of learners and changing labor market requests for skills, to prepare students for a new world of work where the jobs they were taught to do may not yet exist after their graduations. And there are expectations towards the future delivery and instruction mode that are related to blended project-based and interactive learning, including the use of social networks for educational purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me give you first the certificate. Thank you. And this is my token. So, thank you. Well, so we have 3 really good lectures which enabled you, to start flying, to have enthusiasm, motivation, to look down at the valley with binoculars, going to the learning mall where you're going to find some pieces, some chunks of knowledge, some interesting modules or courses, but you are facing some barriers, some obstacles on your way. And now we are going to discuss what are these obstacles which we are facing during our travel. I'm now opening the panel discussion, and my panelists have joined me already here, but I would like to introduce that we have also here with us more people, more panelists. So here at the table we have also Yves Pouny from European Commission, DG GRC Center, Directorate Innovation and Growth. Here in the first row we have experts invited from Alistair Creeman, from Diana Andone, Ebba Osier-Nilsson, Alan Bruce, Wim van Petegem. Then they are from mostly from Eden, EC member or NAP members. Then we have Aushra Gauta-Skaite from Education Development Center. Then Joseph Duarte, also the Eden EC member. So I wanted to give the floor to you here at the premises, but we also have first to break the ice. We have an online question, so I'm going to read it. What is the key message to organizers? How they should support their teachers who become involved in opening up their practice? So, to the organizers, maybe Irina or Ineta or me? Well, I've been talking a lot, so maybe Irina, please.
Yes, this is a very hot issue actually, and I think the question might be about support that should be provided by all stakeholders on the national, regional, and then international level. I understand that whenever teachers show enthusiasm and wish, and they see the meaning that they should be starting using, adapting, developing, well, it's the higher level already, open educational resources, I think all stakeholders should consult what is only the most efficient way to support them, which is also an issue. But support might be in a variety of ways. First of all, it should be long-term support. It can't be one-time investment. It can't be one-time encouragement. But I think it's a very fundamental decision that organization, also national or regional education policy makers and ministers and whoever they are, it's a long-term impact upon the development of the professionals in the country, in the organization, and in the region. So support should come in all kinds of ways: promotion, career development, financial definitely, but motivational support is very much important, and presenting of their cases, promoting them. So that is my first reaction.
Okay, thank you, Irina. Maybe someone else will want to contribute. I will now open the floor for the questions from the public here. Do you have some questions? Some difficult one for us here? Not an easy one, but, well, because I have lots of questions. Okay, I'll continue. We have been talking about the changes in education, about transformation of education for a long time. Since 2005, when we introduced Bologna process, we started to talking about the transformation of education. So, Gard, as you started talking about transformation, what would be the main challenges and the first activities which should be done that we have successful transformation of education, in your opinion? To give us a clue, what to do, why it takes so long.
First, we need to recognize that the world is becoming increasingly more diverse. Even we have globalization, and education is becoming more diverse, and therefore there is no one speed or one solution for all. I think that is the point of departure. I think what UNESCO suggests for the governments and the education sector goes without saying, that each country have to have their own plan, their own targets, their own checkpoints. So when I show the picture where the NORAD, which is the Norwegian Development Agency, mobilized the population for the Sustainable Development Goals, I think that was nice. But I think it is a crisis if nations define the Sustainable Development Goals for being a development country issue. These goals are for all countries, so they need to be anchored by all institutions that has a role to play. So I would say that one milestone that I would say is valid in all countries is whether you have a kind of plan for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, and even in universities. And remember then, the latest publication for UNESCO is talking about accountability, because we have to put accountability at the right place. So who is responsible for what? For example, I'm not accountable for the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm supporting them, I'm mobilized for them, and neither is Anita in Lithuania. But I guess Anita, she has a responsibility that is connected to her university. Yes, and here it goes. So your minister is accountable for the education sector, the prime for the nation, and so on. So you have to find the right accountable level. And if we want to connect open and flexible to these goals, I think that framework has to be the first thing to put in order, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there are lots of tasks, but Mark, you were talking about the knowledge economy and also mentioning the culture. In this transition process and knowledge, what we said, the education for change. So what do you think, why should we are not going so fast? Why it takes time? What would you recommend?
Yeah, tough question. I guess if we had the answers, we would probably be able to. We would probably be able to make a lot more progress. I don't think we fully understand just how complex this is. Whilst, yes, all of us have anchored our talks in the Sustainable Development Goals, there's a sense in which you almost get paralysed by the scale and scope of the challenges we face. And I often remember, I don't know how empirically accurate it really is, but it's cited that 1% of what the world spent on weapons in 1 year would have helped us meet the Millennium Goals for bringing compulsory schooling to the world, and we failed to meet that goal. Well, again, that's up there. It's such a grand challenge, and what can we do about it? Actually, I think we can do a lot. And so for me, firstly, it's about having the right mindset, not necessarily skill sets. I see this about mindsets. Having an open mindset. For me, it's not about open educational resources as kind of the transition was shown to open educational practices. That's a mindset. Everyone can have agency. And so Catherine Cronin's just written a nice piece in EDUCAUSE where she talks about the nano level. I talked about the macro, the meso and micro level. All of those components have to be coming together. So individuals can act, but yes, unless your institution is going to take some action in this space, your government or policymakers equally, and then of course there are the macro level international sort of global bodies as well. All of those have to work, I won't say together, because the tensions that I tried to outline, I think we have to engage with those tensions. And perhaps at the moment some of us are suffering a little false clarity, when some of us, me included, that we're not really talking with some of the drivers, some of the ones that I've outlined that have a different image of the future.
If we are looking from the perspective of European Commission, if maybe you can give overview how in Europe it's going, who is the good, who is lagging behind. You're doing research, you know all the facts. Well, you have to tell that Lithuania is very good, you know, you're now here. So.
Yeah. That's of course a very difficult question. So let me first specify that it's true that I'm part of the European Commission, but I'm not part of the educational policy makers of the Commission. No? So I'm part of the research department of the European Commission called the Joint Research Centers. So what we do is we do analysis, we try to provide evidence to support policymakers, and then of course it's up to the policymakers at the European level, but also within the member states to take decisions. And just to highlight on that one also, because the European Commission can do a lot on education, but at the same time it's also quite limited because there is the issue of subsidiarity. You know, it means that all access to education, there still remains a major challenge related to inequality in education. And that means the following. For example, I give you an example. So that means that actually education achievement or educational performance of those people who are in less privileged socioeconomic situations, families, poorer people, people with low education and parents with low education backgrounds, people in employment, migrants, disadvantaged students, they perform worse than other students which are in better socioeconomic conditions. And obviously that's not because they are more stupid, you know. That's because the socioeconomic context still plays a very, very important role. And you find in the Education and Training Monitor lots of data related to that. For example, one of the data you can find there, and it's based also on the PISA 2015 data, it says that low achievers in education, so those people who have very low basic education, they have 3 times more the possibility to live in poverty compared to those who have higher education. You know, and there are more and more in data. So there are more and more data related to that. So on the one hand, I would like to emphasize that, I mean, this is still a big challenge for Europe. I also have to say, because I gave more the negative kind of data, there's a lot of progress in terms of, for example, early childhood education in Europe, where more and more children participate in early childhood education. Tertiary education attainment is improving, so there are many, many things improving, but inequality in education still remains a major challenge. And actually we know that at the European level, the difficulty is of course not so much saying, okay, this is the problem, the difficulty is to find good and creative solutions to tackle the problem, and to have good policies to tackle the problem. And there it becomes obviously a bit more difficult and a bit more tricky, but also we try to work on that as well.
Thank you. Just taking out of, as we are talking about OER today and OEP, Svetlana, you have been doing a long time working on promotion of OER and you have a project. And today we saw when we ask, someone asked, do they know what is OER, that not lots of people know about it. How are you satisfied with the progress in non-speaking English countries, and what do you think your next steps should be?
Well, I would say that this is not only about OER. I would say that, well, probably the educational community is still not satisfied with the result of the integration of information and communication technologies and the impact they affected from the integration of the technologies on the transformation of education during the past 20-25 years. And, well, the process with open educational resources, well, it should go gradually, step by step, raising the awareness, then promoting, training teachers, but this is about changing the mentality, and this logically takes time. So we should continue our work.
We are optimistic here. Okay, Gard, you want to comment?
A small remark on something that many is not aware of. You know, a common phrase in a European collaboration is, do you have legal basis for doing this and that, right? You follow me on this, right? And I'm not addressing Europe this time. However, think about this. Your prime ministers, your ministers have signed up on the SDGs. Look at 43. There is OER. They have signed up. So there is a legal basis for you requiring your governments to make a policy. Now, you can see in my country, I don't need it. Here in Lithuania, every education is open. We don't need OER. That's fine. Then you can ask for evidence. That was a small remark.
Okay.
May just, Sandra,
yeah.
Just to back up the argument and the importance of the mentality, no? the mentality of opening up education, because we do a lot of research on open education and we come to a similar conclusion. But what is also very important is teacher competences and teacher digital competences related to open education. Because teachers need to be able to know how to deal with OERs, how to use them, where to find them, how to reuse them, how to share them, how to adapt them. You know, so, and there's a huge need for teacher training related to open educational resources, but more broadly also related to digital competences, so being able to really use digital technologies for effective teaching and learning. And that's just a bit of a publicity for my talk tomorrow, because I will speak more specifically about what we developed at the European level is actually a digital competence framework for educators, but that I will explain tomorrow.
Thank you. Wim van Petegem, you had a comment to add?
No, I have a question actually. I would like to come back to what Mark said. He was saying that openness is problematic, but I'm an engineer and I hate problems. I love solutions. So I think Gard then was maybe already indicating a solution that I was maybe thinking of. And that is that why not enforce that all our students, or a certain percentage of all our students, get a sort of online open educational experience. And I'm referring here to the, let's say, the Erasmus program by the European Commission, where we also envision, I think it's 20% of our students by 2020 should have an international experience in their curriculum. Why not do something similar and enforce that all our students in see, be it in higher education or all other levels, it doesn't matter to me, but why not ensure that everyone or a certain percentage has an online open educational experience during their curriculum? Of course, there will be barriers, and Svetlana has mentioned a lot of barriers, and maybe we need a little bit of money then from the European Commission to overcome these barriers. But why not be ambitious and just put a target like that? Maybe not by 2020, that's too short now, but 2030 is also a nice figure.
Okay, now we have comment Diana, and then Mark, yes.
Yes, so in fact, it's quite similar thoughts with Wim. I think we are a bit scaring people with some bundling and all of the, how to say, big words which we are using, and we are trying somehow to make it aware that, okay, big changes are coming. I must say that the big change happened in 1991 with the web. So the change is there, and probably, like you've been showing us the unbundling, it started with the CDs. Napster came up in 2001, was dead by 2002. So that's 15 years ago. And the OER from UNESCO is since 2002, the White Book. So there we still have a lot of history on the back of knowledge and experiences and events and even books and studies and reports. So we don't need to be so scared about that. Maybe a tiny caution about the security and privacy nowadays with the web and internet and with the overcome of artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, which is mostly overtaking nowadays the university campuses. So maybe that should be a bit of a note of a caution nowadays for us, maybe for the managers, not so much at the nano level. But I join him. For example, my perspective quite a lot on preparing for the future jobs and so on, is to prepare what I call the open lifelong learning student, the student which will need to learn digitally and independently all his life, and we need to prepare him for that. And this can be really done at nano level or at meso level. You don't really need so many policies and nothing too much to do that. You just need the willingness of people to do it. And for that, that's the reason why we do open classrooms. That's the reasons why we have teacher training, to encourage and to give models to the teachers, to the real teachers, how they can do it from every level of education. So I will try to make a note to everybody here and also to those which are listening us online. Don't be so scared. Try things. Have the courage of trying new things. The information is there, and a lot of examples are there already. So just tiny changes of doing, I don't know, maybe one course per week or something like that with your students online, putting them to give homeworks or activities online, and it's already a step forward, which will come to a future end, probably in the future.
Okay, just a brief comment, Mark, because we have a lot more questions.
Yeah, to pull together the two, question and comment, I guess we had a strong argument that everyone can make an impact. I do think we have to plan for scalability and sustainability, which is a gap in the open educational resource movement as distinct from OER in relation to OEPs, open educational practices, which is more, I think, what Wim was talking about at a policy level. Remember my comment that we should be focusing on the big ideas, not necessarily openness per se. So if one of those big ideas happens to be lifelong learning, I'm really looking forward to seeing the report for Ireland in the most recent press and research, because lifelong learning, based on Eurostat evidence annually published, for Ireland is going down. And if lifelong learning is one of the big ideas we're trying to promote, and new technologies have a huge role, actually we're not doing very well there. And the European Commission already doesn't mandate, as Eva's pointed out, it can't do that, but it certainly puts into place very clear targets, 15% I think, and up to 20, maybe 25% on a timeline of the next 10 years. So I'm not sure, yes, it's helpful, but on the other hand, ultimately the actions have to come from local governments, and we're not seeing that in all countries.
Okay, but just going back to the audience, we have been talking about that teachers today have to have skills in order to try new ways of teaching, to try new technologies. So I'm sure lots of you here are teachers. How prepared you feel to do this in this way? Can you raise your hand? Who is doing already and who is prepared to try new methods of teaching by? Great. Great, but there are lots of you who still need time and no. So Irina was talking about the training and support, and maybe question for Mineta. You had heard lots of big things here, but from the perspective of the University of Management, what do you feel should be the next steps to support teachers or to enable that every student try at least an online course?
So thank you for the moment, and I would like to start from a little bit different perspective. I want to use the opportunity in a second to thank the keynote speakers. So for me it was like flying, and so I put a lot of ideas on my notes. So really it was inspiring, and I think that audience will agree with me. What you just said, well, we had the opportunity to discuss with colleagues in the morning. And for Lithuania in general, it's a very sensitive issue in general, what just Yves said about this social inclusion. We have a, unfortunately, new direction towards like elite higher education. I don't know what will happen in recent future, but I think that we should start some negotiations with politicians, with our ministry, and between, among universities and administration. So this is another area we should start discussions, and this process most probably should start soon. What concerns our university, so again, this is Irina's field, and as I mentioned in my short words in the morning, our university is ready. So we have started, with new management, new curricular development, and administration supports. Strategically, we think that this is very important. But of course, as everybody else, we are slow. We need skills. Teachers need skills, and therefore, with the help of our great team here, we're trying to change things. So it cannot happen in a minute, in a moment. We need time. And we just have very practical experience. I mean, when we talk with teachers who can produce online courses, online programs, degree programs, so they start to complain. We need time for that. So how to balance the teaching load and all the other extra activities? So yes, motivation is very important, but we need extra time in this very, hectic life that we are running all the time. And people complain we need even time for our families, so we don't have this anymore. We have an initiative, so Vice Rector Kęstutis Šidlauskas is here as well. So we have a project on a small scale because we need funding, we need money. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, we lack this, and we were thinking that we should reduce the teaching load for those who are ready to prepare those online courses, those who are ready to do bigger projects. So I hope that we will start from next semester, because now we are allocating our budget for next year. So I hope that these small initiatives will be a good start for great and bigger projects. But in this respect, we are also addressing the question to our government, local government, national government, or European Commission level. So these projects are strategically very important, and we believe in that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please be careful. We are recording this, so we can ask you in 1 year if you have done it. Okay, well, we have one online questions, and then we have to finish. So, question now I'm opening for everyone. Future of open universities, knowing that some of the open university has not always quickly adapted to changes in technology. Who would like to take the answer? Gard? Okay.
Well, we have most of the open universities as members. And I think, first of all, an open university is not an open university. They are very different. Take, for example, Open University Catalonia and compare with the Open University UK just within Europe. They are very different. and different rules of the game, and open is not open, and all that. And that goes for all the world. So open universities are different. When I started in ICD, I didn't have a clue on all these worlds, right? Because I came from education, higher education and research. Now, so I asked my government, because I was naive. I said, why don't we have an open university in Norway? And they looked at me as I came from Mars. And they said, all universities are open, didn't you know? That is how they regard it. That is how they regard life. Because, and in Finland you have parts of universities that are open universities department in a way, right? So it's say that there is absolutely no one answer on this. It's a wide discussion. So many open universities are as other universities, right? They have to have the discussion on the future role. So I think all these challenges, as Ineta described, is similar, but within the context of different countries. So universities, as many other, like ICD itself, has to redefine its raison d'être, its focus, and where it have to be in the future. I think this is new times, require new definitions of the roles. And then, of course, the discussion that Mark raised suddenly becomes very important, right? When you redefine your role, why are you there? Who should you serve, for which purposes, and why are you doing this and that? So the discussion on the direction you choose becomes important. And I agree with you that those universities that have, within distance education, chosen what you could call the industrial model, right? You found something that perfectly worked, and you scaled it up, and you invested a lot in that. Of course, they have difficult times, because they have to adapt to a new reality. And I'm very optimistic on all those universities that are capable of defining their own future. I'm not pessimist. I don't think the global will crash down the universities, because the universities themselves is the new knowledge infrastructure. And a country without their own cultural and linguistic knowledge infrastructure will lose. So I think the universities will still be and be more important,
okay,
including the Open University too.
Okay, and I'm going to give the last word to Irina to say from the Eden's point, openness and enhancement of the universities in openness.
What I have learned, and we all have very important lessons actually. So from my involvement in different international events, conferences, talking with people, is that, as Irish president said, we talk the talk, but we also have to walk the walk. And now actually it is very, very expensive already, investment in some empty talk without the walk. And we can't allow this any longer, I think. If we say that we need to apply technologies at school, the teacher should feel supported, legitimate in the actions. So the nation, the country should have the framework to act and to teach online in an open way, using technologies, the program to support development of digital skills and competencies. And if we already accept the decision, it must be supported by actions. Otherwise, we have to stop, to refuse, to say, I exit, and I don't implement this anymore. And actually, the people here, I want to thank all of you who come here. I know there are people from my country, from government, from other stakeholders, but also the international experts that came here. And this is the first day. We will continue tomorrow. These people are great. I know that whomever we address and invite, they come and they consult and they share sincerely with the their best expertise and experience. So I want to thank Eden people, I want to thank ICD, I want to thank UNESCO, and I want to thank European Commission because these initiatives come from all of you together, and you really help to find the best solution, trying to advise on the risk that could be accepting one or another decision, which is very, very much important. So openness will help us to prevent these mistakes. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We have to finish for today. Thank all of you for watching us online and here in the room. We had a short journey. It was interesting, motivating, enthusiastic. So please stay enthusiastic, and even for tomorrow, for the next journey. You start tomorrow at 9:45. So thank you to all participants and all panelists today for participation, and see you tomorrow. Bye.
I would kindly ask everyone to continue in an informal discussion where we can't say openly here, maybe we need to discuss something. So the reception is awaiting for us near the big hall where you registered. So please continue.